Hello, welcome to Stranded Bricklayer. In this video today, I will be showing you this brick project that I just completed. This is a second hearth that I've added into my home that I am currently expanding its wood heat capabilities. This is my second hearth. In a sec here, you'll get a chance to see the original hearth that I've heated my house primarily with wood heat, supplemented slightly with electrical. And I did do a propane conversion to my furnace last year, but I really hate forced air so much. Granted, probably wouldn't be so bad if I sealed up my ducts a little bit better. I think there's some damage in the crawl space. This is it's originally actually a dual wide trailer. It's been renovated several times, and it would appear to be a modern modular, but the ducting is pretty bad in it. And with pets and my sensitivity to allergens, I just not extremely sensitive, but enough that it really it bothers me enough that I just prefer to go with the wood heat. And with current political events, everything else that's going on, there's just good reason to have, not to mention living in Canada, it's really good reason to have wood heat backup or some kind of supplemental heating throughout the winter, especially in rural areas, which I certainly do live in. I live in a small village of about 300 people, and it's not uncommon for the power to get knocked out here more than other places. And just for me going on the wood heat for the last 7 years, it's just been a little bit of a nuisance. I'm trying to find better ways. The main reason I wound up with two stoves because I had two stoves because I had a stove actually given to me, which we'll actually get into. So this is the current project, and unfortunately I didn't have a chance to wash this yet. I wanted to wait about another 12 hours of making this video. It takes a long time to process one of these videos, so I just kind of had to get it out while I could. And I'll try to maybe update the thumbnail. I'll do a good thumbnail once I do get this washed and get the stove installed. So you can see here in a second my original stove, me bringing it in. This was given to me by a good friend, and I upgraded the size. So this is about 90% larger than the original stove I had, the stove that I'm moving to this area. And one of the biggest problems with me, running, especially with a job when I do work in the winters, I don't always work winters, is just, running the electrical heaters as a supplement, which is absolutely necessary in, basically January, February, March. And then getting home every day if I am working, and the heat just being, completely gone, right? So you can see here, I actually managed to move this in by myself. This was a bear of a task, and I did have to do some modifications to a small feature that I had outside. This was an unfinished project. I never even got around to properly grouting this, but nevertheless I had to make a modification to get this in, and luckily my picker truck that I built was able to get the stove high enough to be able for me to move it in. And yeah, that's the biggest problem that I was struggling with, is trying to keep the house warm. So one of the considering, if you see here, considering how large of a stone feature this is brand name cultured stone actually that I used here. You can see this is a fairly thick stone. There's about 2 inches worth of stone and mortar here for thickness, and it does go down a hallway as well. And that was my intention for making this stone feature so large, was for it to be a bit of a heat sink. And the stove that I picked up was and unfortunately I don't have a picture of it yet, but was rated at 2,000 square feet, which my home is only at a 1,200 square foot trailer, so it should have been enough, but it really just isn't. The fact of the matter, it just isn't. So I got this stove, which is nearly twice the size, and I'm hoping between these two stoves and between the massive amount of stone that I have here, you can see this is true brick. This is actual natural brick. I was planning originally on going with more of this stone up the sides here, but fact of the matter is I ran out of the stone, and I had this brick. It's a actually very nice brick. And, you know, I figured, what the hell, because this additional brick will work as a great heat sink as well. Hopefully, between the two stoves, between all the stone, you know, I may even start stacking stone on top of the stone or bricks on top of the stoves as well, just to add more of a heat sink. The heat sink factor isn't as significant as I'd hoped it was, but you know, just every little bit helps. And if I can have this be not so uncomfortable in the mornings, especially because I don't like waking up in the middle of the night to feed the stove. And the stove, my previous stove was always completely out of coals in the morning, so I'd always have to restart the stove. There would occasionally, once in a while, be maybe a few coals left, but in this new stove, I'm certain I'll have enough coals left in the morning. And if I have to restart the fire in this stove, it won't be that much of a bear. At least, again, I'll have more of a heat sink, and I'll have more heat. You know, between the two stoves, just that much more of an advantage. I'm feeling fairly confident I'll need to rely very little on my electric heaters this winter, even if I do end up having to work, which is looking pretty likely that I'm going to. I'm actually currently looking to get back into welding, because masonry just been too much of a bear in my body, especially with this pre-mix mortar. Maybe that's what I'll talk about in this part here. You can see me wetting my mud board, and let's just have another look at that. Actually, pre-mix mortar is like a dual-edged sword. For one, I personally hate these 80-pound sacks. These 80-pound sacks are, you know, typically in my area what you're going to find in commercial suppliers. And then we have these 25-pound sacks here, 25 kg, and these are 40 kg sacks, which you're typically going to find in commercial suppliers, and these are what you're going to find at Home Depot. I wish everybody sold the 25 kg sacks, because, you know, granted, it didn't really help in the industry much anyways, because what ends up happening, they call them back savers in some areas. They don't end up saving your back. Is what they end up doing is, because they're slightly more than half of one of these sacks, and your employer is just going to end up making you carry 2 of these sacks at a time once these come out. So it ends up even being worse than these sacks. But if you don't work for a legitimate Nazi like I used to, or you know, like a slave driver, you know, then these sacks are great, and for my own personal use, I absolutely love them. The trouble is that they're so much more expensive than these. You can almost get the 25 kg sack for the same price as the 40 kg. So I just kind of want to make quick mention of that. The other thing too, you may be able to see here is it's a little bit too fast of a time lapse, but I always wet both sides of my mud board. Just a little bit of a pro tip there. You know, you can never get laborers to actually do that for you, you know, no matter how many times you ask. Yeah, you can't quite really see it, but nevertheless, we'll get into the start. I've got everything. Now, granted, you know, there's no reason you can't just make marks down for your first row of brick when you're doing your layout. If you're working with the same material repeatedly over and over and over again, there's no reason you can't do that. The reason I like to lay my bricks out, you know, and actually see it in place before I start my layout is because sometimes, depending on the material, again, if this is material maybe that you haven't been using before, the variance between the materials themselves can be drastically different. You know, a lot of times, a lot of material suppliers are kind of sloppy, and there can be up to a 1/4 inch difference between some of the bricks. So that's something maybe you can cut off right off the start. And if you're not so experienced with doing layouts, it's a good idea to just do that as well, just to, you know, just to quit, you know, save yourself some mistakes, because everybody does it. I guarantee, especially if you're new to the trade, doing layouts, we call it putting a half in the wall, where, you know, you start with a full brick on one side and a full brick on the other side. And then when you get to the middle, sometimes if you just have it by measurements in your head, you may end up getting to the middle and it doesn't work out to a full brick in the middle, and you end up having to put a half in the wall, which you know, typically you would just tear all the bricks back up and then start with the right brick at the other end of the wall. But if you're in an industrial situation, maybe so whoever did the layout made the marks wrong, and then you build your leads up, which you'll see me actually not doing in this video. I don't build leads in this because I'm doing everything on my level, so I do it course by course. You see me putting the fasteners in here quick too. So if both of your your top bricklayers are on the ends, they think the layout, they think the marks are right, they build both their leads up, we're ready to go, rebars have already been drilled, and the next thing you know, there's a half in the wall. If it's something that's maybe not exposed or maybe not super critical, sometimes we'll just leave it, right? And it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. And it's very embarrassing. It's very embarrassing. It's happened to everybody. I swear it's happened to everybody. Okay, so you see me put the fasteners in. Those are standard brick ties. In different applications, you'll see different wall fasteners used. These do allow a little bit of flex in the wall, so that is sort of necessary. You'll see that in the more industrial fasteners. They're actually an L plate that bolts to the wall that has a slotted section, and then it's a piece of thick wire. It's about a 1/4 inch thick wire that goes through the slotted section, which keeps the brick from falling off the wall. Like, it'll keep it from falling off the wall, but it does allow movement up and down, so you don't get cracks and damage from things binding up if there is displacement or movement. So it allows for that movement. That's one of the things you learn when getting into bricklaying initially, is that mortar is designed to be weaker than, that's the reason the lime is put into the mortar, is for plasticity for one, for malleability, to be able to use it with a trowel. And then also it does give it a bit of compressive strength. It gives it some flexibility so that the wall can actually move and stretch and bend sometimes. I've seen walls actually snake before, damaged walls that have been blown over in the wind that we end up having to knock down. And you'll actually see them snake, and there's very little damage oftentimes to the joints themselves, even after they move like a sheet of paper in the wind. So again, I'm putting more fasteners in, and I'm going to put quite a few fasteners in here. You can see a little bit of water damage in here. I did test those studs. It's perfectly fine. I did seal up the exterior of this window, and poly right here is an interesting note to make. It's a good idea to put poly up over the windows. So if you do you're working maybe up top here, and you do end up happening to drop something, that you don't end up damaging the window, it's some very cheap insurance, and you can reuse it. I keep all kinds of poly with me and bring it around. I have a nice piece of canvas here laid down for protecting the stone base. And yeah, so this poly, though, you'll see maybe eventually in my thumbnail if I do update it. I do actually have these polys up here all year round. I use it for temperature control, to help diffuse the light as it comes in, for privacy, and then in the winter for added insulation. I do actually have a layer of poly here, and I also have a layer of what would you call it, vinyl or laminate flooring, subflooring, that sort of styrofoamy kind of spongy stuff, trying to get the house as efficient and insulated as possible. Again, you can see how thick these brick are here, and the voids in the brick will just add again as more thermal barriers. Just doing as much as I can to try to make this as efficient as possible. I've got a few solar panels, which aren't super useful in the winter, but you can't completely go off grid, especially living in an actual town or village or wherever city that you may live in, but you can get close, and especially with, like, again, civil all the crazy stuff going on in the world right now. Luckily, so I do live in Canada, like as I mentioned, and luckily it's not going to be as bad here as it is in Europe. I don't think they have great ways of actually transferring natural gas, not unlike Russia, I believe, that has those gigantic, freaking crazy looking tankers. You want to Google one of those sometimes, actually. So they're crazy looking tankers for moving natural gas. I don't think that's a very common vessel, and I don't think it's something that Canada maybe even has. So I don't think we're going to have even though the commodity prices in some parts of the world, it could be pretty extreme, I don't think we're going to have that much of a problem here in Canada. Nevertheless, it's good because you don't know, the power grid goes down, your furnace isn't going to work regardless, right? It's not like you can just crack a line and have a flame blowing in your house, and you might still have gas pressure, but it ain't going to do a whole lot of good unless you have a gas stove, and then you're just going to risk the chance of carbon monoxide poisoning. So I'll just make quick mention here. This is about, with the stone and the brick here, maybe even the brick alone is roughly about $1,000 worth of materials between the mortar and the brick ties. And I ended up using, just on the brick alone, I ended up using, what was it, 8 of the 80 kg bags. So pretty significant. And then unfortunately ended up bumping the terminal for my light here. So it's gonna get a little dark for a second throughout this portion of the video. Now you can see me going around the window here. I left a few of these bricks out. I'm gonna end up installing Rollocks here. You'll see. I'll try to get you as good as a view of these Rollocks when I do go to install them. There's a special way you do the end Rollock, so it's actually a nice design. It doesn't have that edge with the holes on it. The Rollock is essentially just a brick cut in half, usually half. You may have to, depending on your bond here, your gauging, you may have to cut them down slightly, or sometimes, or depending how far away from the wall they are, they may have to be a little bit longer or shorter, but they're essentially just a half a brick laid on its side. That gives you a sill. So essentially what they are is a sill. And then you've probably seen me measuring these lines here. You can you can kind of see some of these lines. These are my gauge lines, which you have this gauge tape, and a gauge tape is essentially the same as a tile tape. You may be aware of these special tape measures for doing brick and tile. They're not like a regular tape measure. They may have a portion of them that does have inches or metric measurements or something like that, but what they actually are is there are different heights, different thicknesses of brick here that you're using. Over the industry, there's all kinds of different thicknesses of brick. There's generally only a couple different sizes that you'll see most of the time, pretty common sizes, and that's what these brick tapes are for. You have your imperial size and your metric size, and what these brick tapes do is, because the distance to the top of a window may not always be the same, or the height of the window may not always be the same. So you're going to have to maybe make these joints a little bit thicker or a little bit thinner, depending on what height you need to hit here. And my most important two heights were the Rollock to the bottom of the window and the ledge that you'll see me install the angle iron for here, for over top of the window. So so those are the 2 points that I mark, and then I can use this tape measure that gives you 10 different thicknesses of your joints to help you gauge to hit those points, and then you can lay those marks out, and then you try to just stay on those bonds, and you're going to hit exactly where you want to hit without having to make a cut once you reach that point. If you end up having to make cuts, it's really bad. I got pretty lucky with my bond on this as well. This worked to fulls and halves to both sides of this background here, and it even worked to full halves upside the window. I had to do a little bit of expanding and squeezing, which is very common, and but I didn't actually end up having to make a cut. A lot of times if you do end up having to make a cut, what you'll do is you'll just take one of these brick, maybe one from the end, and cut ½ inch off of it, maybe even an inch off of it, and then that will allow you to get to a closer space. Now sometimes it's just the worst spacing possible, and what you end up having to do is to make it not so noticeable, because maybe you got to lose 2 inches to make that bond work properly in that brick. So what I'll do is, to make it not so noticeable, is I'll take 10 mil off a 3 or 4 brick, space it out throughout the length of the wall here, and then you won't even know that any of the brick are cut. Nobody will ever notice. It looks like I got the light back on, loading up my brick again, and we're just about to the point of installing the ledge here. And this is common industry standard here. This is you know, I got this piece of angle iron. Unfortunately, the angle iron had just a little bit of a bend in it. I drilled the holes for it. I found the studs. I got some lag bolts, and I painted it black to match the brick. You know, you may want to choose different colors depending on what brick you're working with, but typically we just always paint the angle iron black. And that angle iron is typically what you'll use to install brick on the outside of the house as well. So you can see me install it, level it here, and I'm right on gauge, right where I needed to be. And now that thickness of the angle iron here, this was 1/4 inch, and my joints have been about 3/8 of an inch up to this point because I needed to gain a little bit to hit this right perfect over top of the window. So now this course here, I'm going to squeeze on this course so that when I do get over to this point, this joint all the way along is going to be a 1/4 inch, and you won't notice that one little bit. And that angle iron sits back about 1/2 of an inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch from the front of the joint, so I'm able to fill that in with mortar as well. And now nobody knows the difference, right? You're over top of your window, you have a strong, sturdy beam here to lay your brick on. And as soon as I get this course here, I would have liked to, you know, obviously you want to try to put some of those ties in right there, but I wasn't able to because that angle iron was 4 inches tall and these brick are only about 3. So I got 2 courses on here now, and now I'm installing my next set of ties. You should see me installing my next set of ties. And then there's going to be one more set of ties once you get to the top here. 1 or 2 courses from the top, you're going to want to install your last set of ties. You always want, as soon as you can, over top of an angle, and then, you know, depending on what your spacing is. Again, I put as many ties as I could in this because there was no reason for me not to, and this is a trailer house, so there could be more flexibility. So I put tons of ties in, and my spacing vertically, like typically what it is it's staggered on 32-inch spacing. So I would have, instead, because here I'm going every stud, so typically what you would do is you would go a stud, skip a stud, stud, skip a stud, and you do that along a wall, and then you go 16 inches up, and then you alternate studs, and that's basically what your spacing is. You either go 16 inches up or 32 inches up, depending on the code, depending on what you're doing. Again, if you're using the industrial fasteners, there's not as much of a need, so you can probably go on 32 and 32. And these are my wires for my surveillance system, which look like absolute dog shit, and I'm glad to finally be able to hide these. And you know, you'll see, I guess, you can see me when I'm joining here. I'm using the brush, and I'd be perfectly honest, for regardless of what I'm doing, the brush is typically for split face block and split face brick, I guess, as well. But for split face material is what typically people use the brush for. I use the brush personally all the time because the brush makes a little bit less of a mess. I can get a bit more aggressive with it, and it doesn't smear wet mortar around on my brick. If you've worked in the industry at all, you may be noticing how clean I keep my material here. Some of this brick here is just the dirt from it sitting outside for a couple of years. There are very few streaks on here from me back troweling, essentially, when I'm cutting the mud off and hitting the brick with little bits of dirt here and there. I've worked with some people who would have multiple smears, like little marks like this. Insane, covering 2/3 of the entire project, like multiple smears on every single brick, and it's an absolute chore to have to clean afterwards. Now, again, you know, unfortunately, I wasn't able to clean this before making this video. Let's have a little bit of a stop here and just talk for a second. Maybe we'll stop just a little bit. You'll see me doing my space out here just to make sure everything's working properly, just double checking. I already know it does. Actually, okay, so maybe it's a little bit further on. You'll actually see the piece here. Anyways, so cleanliness is great. Now, I have this clean enough that I'm not going to need to acid wash this. And you especially don't want to be acid washing in people's houses. You want to be doing as little washing as possible in people's houses, because it is going to release all that moisture back into the air. This is basically a humidifier is what this is going to turn into. It's super humid in my house right now. The joints are just sweating like crazy. This is going to cure nice and slow. This is going to be very strong, relatively. And so I won't need to actually, like, I've cleaned so much brick, and typically what we'll do for exterior, for industrial brick, is we'll go along with a mix of muriatic acid, and I mean, that's what we used to use. Was it muriatic or I can't remember what it is now. It's a bit of a weaker acid now, but it's still pretty bad. I've got actually sprayed in the face with it before from that Nazi that I used to work for. Just crazy. I was like, the guy's just standing on it. Anyways, yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. Luckily, it didn't get in my eyes. Sprayed right in the face. Anyways, so I won't need any sort of acids or cleaners on this, and I'm just going to, once the joints get a little bit cured now, I probably want to wait a little bit longer, just so that I'm not putting any more water into this brick. Being that this is interior, I don't have to and that it's warm, I don't have to worry too much about effervescence. And what ends up happening, like, let's say this is winter and you're going to try to wash this, and it's cold out, and it's the mortar is still green. If you wash this, and then all that brick and all those mortar joints soak up that water, and then it freezes overnight, for whatever reason, it releases effervescence into the brick, and you're going to get all sorts of that white, crystalline, mineral-looking contamination all over the bricks. Now, being that this is inside, I could pretty much wash it, the next morning. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal, but I want to wait a little bit. You don't want to wait too long. It's not like tile in that you have to wash it immediately after, or else you end up having a bear of a time cleaning off all that dried grout. It's not like grout. This is technically grout is what this mortar is, but it's not like tile grout in that you have to clean it instantly. I can wait a few days on this. It's very easy to clean this up afterwards, and I'll just hit it with a brush. I'll brush it really hard, and I'll just kind of wipe it down. And I don't want to, I don't want to be coming in here with a hose and spraying this down as what you typically do outside. So I'm just gonna, I'll wet it down. I'll spray it with a little bit of a sprayer and some water, and then I'll scrub it really hard, and then I'll try to give it a half decent rinse, and it should be spick and span. And then afterward, if you want to seal it, it will give it more of that glazed look, but I'm not going to be sealing this because I don't want any of those, be spraying those chemicals inside. So that's pretty much cleaning. Now you can see me here installing my Rollock. And again, I'm not using lines in this. This is all on the level. And I am fairly rusty considering, like, okay, this is me cutting that end piece here. My skills definitely aren't what they were at one point in time. Let's see if we can have maybe a little bit better of a look here. When this is finished, you'll be able to see what that actually was. Well, let's see if we can have a little bit of a look here. It's unfortunately I wasn't able to make this clip as long as I would have liked. I tried to lengthen the time and slow the time down. So you can see now, what I did is I cut the inside of the brick out, and I cut the back of another brick out. Otherwise, you would have just the holes in this clay look here, because this is essentially like a stained brick or a painted brick. So I cut that portion out. I take the front of another brick, and now what I'll end up doing is I'll just throw a ton of mortar down. I'll put the two pieces together, and I'll lay it in there. And it's super sloppy and moving around, and I end up really fiddling with this for quite a while. You just basically have to just sit there and keep, holding it and slicking the joints off, and eventually it'll be hard enough that you can kind of let it go. And once it's cured, it's done. It's good. It ain't coming off there. Now I'm cleaning up. I had a bit too much mud left over. It's a bit embarrassing, but that is what it is. I just, I hate having mud left over. I was thinking about mudding these joints in, but I'm just going to put some quarter round on there. I actually want to have another look at that you know, we can get a better look at, oh, a little bit too far, just right to here, I guess. You can get a little bit better of a look right there at the Rollock itself from the side profile. Try to capture it a little bit better for you this time. Right, coming up here, got that out of the way. And these Rollocks can be very tough if you don't have a lot of experience with them. So you can see how it looks with the piece in. And I end up having to put a little bit of a chunk of something in here that I took out afterward just because it wasn't holding up on its own. Now this is at a slant. You can see a little bit rough. Like I say, I'm a little bit out of practice, but it'll pass for my place. And that's it. If you have any questions, I do have a Discord that I use for gaming. Maybe I can leave that link in that description. I do have a lot of renovation stuff that I have on that Discord, or if you want to just leave some questions in the comments, I can do my best to answer them. I'm not a journeyman bricklayer. I guess I should have maybe mentioned that at the beginning of the video. I've been doing it for 15 years, and I've been on the tools full-time for about 10 years. But in this part of the world, it's not really required for you to have your ticket. So I don't know everything about everything, and you know, you may have, you know, criticisms of the way that I do things, but that's my best attempt at it, and I hope you like the video.